welcome. Today we are on our third vlog of the New York City Independent Film Festival, and today we have Jessica and Jackie. And please introduce yourself and tell us what your film is.
I am Jackie Torrens, and I'm the writer and director of the feature documentary Bernie Langille Wants to Know What Happened to Bernie Langell, and I'm based in Halifax, Nova Scotia.
And I'm Jessica Brown, in sort of cahoots with Jackie. We have a company together, and I'm the producer of Bernie Langille Wants to Know What Happened to Bernie Langell.
Well, thank you. And thank you for coming. Let's start with, either one of you can answer, but let's start with what made you want to be a filmmaker?
Jess, why don't you start with that?
Oh, God, really? Okay. All right. Dennis, this might be a little off the cuff here, but gosh, I started in the industry in 2003, which makes me young, and
Very young, trust me.
very young, like newborn basically. And yeah, I got it actually. Originally I was like, I'm going to do art direction, but then I kind of got into production management and producing and loved it, because there's nothing more fun than having an idea, working with a cool team and seeing it all the way to fruition, and then having it at like a festival like yours, Dennis. It's very exciting. Okay. Jackie, go ahead.
I started off actually as a poet. That's all I was ever going to do, was write poetry. And then about a writer's block led to me writing for theater, and that led to me acting for theater. And then that led to me writing and acting for television, which led to me doing radio documentary, which also then led to me doing film documentary. But I also had an experience where I was really inspired by a cinematographer I was working with on a project. I was so inspired by their job, which was to think in images and pictures, that really started me wanting to work in film. And so actually my very first film was a short narrative feature about a fetus in a jar who's just trying not to get his bottle broken.
That's what it was.
I like it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Did you find when you first decided to be a filmmaker, did your friends and family go, what are you, insane? Or they go, oh, that's really a great idea. Let us support you all the way.
Oh my God.
Jesse,
yeah, I'll say, well, as Jackie said, her first career was as a poet. Mine was as a marble carver.
A marble carver. Okay.
Yes.
Like
I trained in Italy and everything, but my parents were very much like, oh, no. Don't do that. My brother, I should also say, is a lawyer and a successful one. So I think I'm kind of the dark sheep in the family, as it were. Jackie?
Well, I actually lost my parents when I was really young. I lost my mom when I was a baby. I lost my father a few years after that. So really, the decision for me of what to do with my life was always left to me. I never had any family giving me flack about my practical career choices, which has been lucky. But actually, that experience of losing my parents so young was, as you can imagine, really formative. With them kind of went the story, my origin story, and there was no one around to kind of tell me about my history of my parents and where I've come from. So I think I became a storyteller because in the absence of knowing my own story, I decided very young as a child that I would create story. And of course, from story comes meaning. And so I followed the North Star of story all my life, and it's given my life great purpose and great meaning. So
that sounds great, actually.
Yeah. there are orphan benefits. Not being told what to do is one of them.
I wouldn't know about them. I got grief my entire life. So are you guys part of, is there a film community up there that you're very much a part of and very much supportive of each other?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, up here in Canada, Nova Scotia, we have a very thriving film industry. We generally have a number of productions going on all year round, specifically in the summer. Of course, right now with the Writers Guild strike, that is affecting us not as much as our American friends, but it is affecting us a little bit, certainly with service productions that were coming out here. But yeah, we have a pretty verbose, is that the right word? Verbose?
That's a great word. I love it.
Oh, great. Okay, excellent. A film community out here. And we always sort of joke that it's a little like, because it's smaller, certainly, than say Los Angeles or even Toronto, Canadian comparison. we tend to know each other a lot, and that's kind of great, because then of course you do find your people within that industry, and you love to work with them all the time. When I first started in the industry, I got my schooling in Quebec, in Montreal, and I came back here and I sort of thought, okay, I wonder how many film companies there are here. And my first job was to go and get like the production guide so I could try to find a job. And I was blown away by how many there were in town, actually. I was sort of like, no way, this is amazing. And I was lucky to get a job pretty quickly, actually. So,
Sounds great.
yeah.
Yeah, the industry in Nova Scotia is about 40 years old. And in 2015, we had our tax credit taken away for a bit. And that really shook our industry up. And we've been slowly rebuilding since then. But we have a number of crew and a number of productions that happen here for sure. And Jess and I started our company, Pete Media, about 10 years ago. And we'd both been working in narrative. And we started our company. We started focusing primarily on documentary because 10 years ago, women had more of a shot at being given opportunities to direct and lead documentary productions, because traditionally documentary pays less. So it's been interesting to see the change in the industry, especially in our corner of the world, in the last 10 years, the last 5, the last 2 years, the last 2 weeks, as the door has like slightly been opened a little bit more to let more kinds of people who've been traditionally shut out of opportunities. I feel like the air is coming in the room for story, and it's really exciting. And it means for Jess and I that actually this year we're returning to our narrative roots. And currently this year we've been working on narrative projects to go along with our documentary work, which is great because I find both forms of work inform the other.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Great. I was up in Nova Scotia actually, and I shot a documentary about your fishing industry a long time ago. I don't remember when. It's out there on I don't even know where it is anymore, but it was called Will the Fishermen Survive? Because everybody was saying the fish will survive, and nobody showed the fishermen will survive. And I was up there and got yelled at by some fishermen and stuff, but it was kind of cool.
I used to feel, especially creatively, we used to joke that we felt strangled by the cultural stereotypes of fiddles and fish. And so part of the work that Jess and I have done over the last 10 years is to make sure we're doing really unconventional work that defies the stereotypes of our region, which is great. Yeah.
So what made you decide to make this film?
Sure.
Well, this film was actually kind of 10 years in the making. So about 10 years ago, I was doing a radio documentary for the Canadian Broadcasting Company. I was doing it on artists who create in miniature. And I was also at the same time reading about the work of an American called Frances Glessner Lee, who around the 1920s was a woman who wanted to go into forensic science. She wanted to be a criminologist. She was a rich woman, and her family basically said, you'll do no such thing as have a job and a career. Why don't you go make tiny things? So she started making miniatures, but she started making miniatures of real life crime scenes, and they're called the Nutshell Diaries of Unexplained Death. And they were used at the time and still today to train police and detectives in their crime work and how to look for clues and how to solve a crime. So I was really inspired by Frances Glessner Lee's work. And at the same time, I was with this group of artists who create in miniature, many of whom were women of a certain age who had been doing this art form all their life as a hobby, and a hobby that was dismissed by and large because it was seen as something to do with childhood. It's also largely done by women. But when you consider the art form of trying to depict our life in 1/12 scale, it's an art form that's really overlooked and underrated and deserves a closer look. There's nothing like a miniature that can provide the big picture perspective on something, and that's something we don't usually get. So at the time, I said to a few of the artists who created miniature, if I can get a film off the ground, would you make miniatures for me? Would you make the sets? And so off I went on a search for the story, and I knew I wanted to do a documentary film using these miniatures, and I knew I wanted to find a story that was quite subversive to go against the expected stereotypes of what you might use miniatures for. A nice, pretty little story tied up with a bow. I didn't want that. So we did find one story and that fell through. And then in 2016, I was on Twitter one night and this man named Bernie Langille, who I didn't know, I don't even know how he showed up in my Twitter feed. It was around midnight and he started tweeting out a series of tweets that basically started with, I'm named after my grandfather. I never met him. He died 50 years ago on a military base under really mysterious circumstances. And this is what I know. And he started typing out what he knew of his family story and was asking the public for help. If anybody knew anything, would they give him any information? And he was at a point in his life where he had his first marriage bust up. He was kind of depressed and lonely and had time on his hands. So he had picked up this family mystery as a way to keep himself busy. So I just reached out to him. Dennis, I'm sure you have this experience a lot where you reach out to people and say, I'm a storyteller. Would you meet with me? And he did. And so that's how the film began. And essentially, as you know, it's the story of a grandson who's trying to find out what happened to his grandfather. And it kind of starts as a true crime tale and becomes a personal existential investigation into family narratives and intergenerational trauma, really.
Sounds very cool.
Yeah, we think so.
And I will say too, with the miniatures, Dennis, these women are incredible. And to like, just blow your mind to the point where they were into, specific detail. For example, like in one of their sets, it was like, well, how much did this person smoke? So they actually like aged the walls in these miniature sets. Like as you see in the film, you'll see all these like there's an ashtray that's like this big, and it's like, how is that even possible? But it's so, and they did it all based on historical research and looking at family like home videos,
Yeah.
from back in the day, from the 60s. So yeah, they did such an incredible job. And frankly, the best art department I've ever worked with.
It was kind of incredible. They created 18 different sets based on the Langell family story. And as just said, with historical accuracy, pouring over home movies and pictures. And Jess and I would go to the various locations and try and get as much information as we could. And the two women who made all the sets, their names are Shelley Acker and Iris Sutherland. They had never worked in TV or film before. And like Jess mentioned, they became our sole art department for an entire feature film in their late 60s and early 70s. And they were so professional. It was like they were 30-year industry vets. Anything you asked them, there was never any protest. There was never any problem that couldn't be solved. It was never yes or no. It was always how. Their work's incredible. And I'd love for them to be hired by other people in the industry. So.
All right, so I was going to ask you, what was the hardest part to make this movie, and what was the most fun part? But in some ways, you answered that. But if you have other things you want to throw in there, that would be my next two questions.
I would say filming during the pandemic was something. I'm sure every single filmmaker and television person in production is sort of like, yeah, wow, who saw that coming? And also, how do we handle this? Because also a lot of our characters were older, right? It's an older story, and so it's sort of like we have to be so careful, and we were extremely careful, and of course our crew is just incredible and had no problem with that. So I'd say that was maybe the hardest. What do you think, Jackie?
I think so too. And I mean, my friends who were working in narrative at the time, they faced many difficulties. But at the end of the day, I always felt like, well, I know the world's on fire, but you can at least say to your actor who's getting paid, I know the world's crazy, but can you put your hat on and go say these lines? Whereas when you're working in documentary, you're working with real people. And so we had been filming for 2 months when the pandemic happened. And then we began filming that summer, which was only a couple of months after the pandemic happened. And it was really hard for real life people to resume where we had left off before the world went into a global crisis. So I found that really difficult, kind of getting everybody's mindset back into the story. As well as just working in those conditions. But everyone pulled together and did their best. Their best. It was crazy. The best time of making Bernie, I have many good times actually, but We had a month-long shoot in a studio in downtown Halifax where we just had a month to shoot miniature reenactments. And so during a pandemic lockdown, our small crew was able to continue work in the studio. And so I would leave home every day and I would walk through Halifax, which just felt like a ghost town because it was in lockdown. And I would, get to the studio, open this tiny door, disappear behind it into this black womb of a studio with all the lights fixated on these tiny sets, and we would work together, and it was wonderful. And of course, even though we had a month to shoot the miniatures, it still wasn't enough, never is. But I really enjoyed that time. Yeah, but I never want to make a film in a global health crisis again. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone.
Yeah, it's definitely not ideal.
So are you guys happy with the final product, or do you think that now that you look back, you sit there and go, oh man, we could have done better? Do you guys have that?
Oh my God, Dennis. I think that always happens. In some of our past productions, there's certain scenes that I'll just have to just look at Jackie because I will have done something in that scene where I'm like, I'm so sorry that happened again. With this one, I think we're pretty happy with how it ended. And certainly for the Langille family, actually, who of course this story is their story. I think we found some answers for them. I think we found some clarification for them. And I think it has helped that family come to terms with sort of, this mysterious death of a complicated family member from 1968.
I don't know if I've ever made anything where I went, that's exactly what I meant and exactly what I intended, and I would never change a thing. And, filmmakers are people too, and we're influenced by what is happening in our life at the same time that we're making a film. I can look back at my films and know what I was going through personally, depending on what film it was. And sometimes I can see the influence of that in the film, even though the film's not, about me. But so Bernie Langille, yes, there are definitely things that, if I could wave a magic wand, I would do differently, but I don't tend to kick myself too much about stuff like that. When I was in my 20s, I was really Catholic and punitive about the creative process. And I think I
I'm
told
sorry.
even though I wasn't raised religiously at all, but I think I had this idea of that I had to be really hard on myself. And that would be some indication of my high standards. And all that did was interfere with getting stuff done and shut the creative process down, which needs definite elements around it for it to thrive. And one is to be uninhibited, and one is to play, and one is to think. So any film I do, even if there are parts where, I wish I could have done better in certain areas, I just think, well, on to the next creation, As long as there's progress, there's hope for me, And as just mentioned, when we started this film, we never thought we would be able to answer this family mystery, have all the answers, tie it up in a tidy little bow. We weren't under that impression. We knew it was a tale about intergenerational trauma. But we were able to get some answers, and we were able to get especially one important answer that brought a lot of healing to the family that they hadn't anticipated. So that meant a lot to us and to the family.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Do you have any last words that you would encourage indie filmmaker? I live in Manitoba, and everybody around me sits there and goes, what do you mean you want to make a movie? Go work in the local factory. Do you have any words for them? Any words of encouragement, any words of wisdom that you want to share with them?
I don't know what Jess would say, but I guess do things that scare you, even when they scare you. Everybody who's had anything to do with making a film has had that feeling that they don't know what they're doing, and maybe they're an imposter, and maybe they shouldn't be saying yes to a gig. The very first film I made, the one I referenced, that was about a fetus in a jar just trying not to get his bottle broke. I mean, that I had never done anything in film before, and I wrote a script and I funded it myself for $800. The fetus was the most important part of the film, which was $150, and he was from the States. And then we made that film, and it changed my life. So the worst thing that you can do is fail, and that's actually not the worst thing that can happen.
It is sort of a crazy world that we live in, that we work in, but there's just nothing better, in my opinion. I love working with certain people. Jackie is obviously one of them. And there's sort of just something, yeah, I don't know. I just personally love it. And I think if you have the drive to do it, there is a world for you. So go for it.
Yes, I mean, unless you have any other final thoughts you would like to say.
Yes, we're coming to New York.
We're excited. We're going to
Ready
be
for
there.
We're
Yeah.
coming to the fest, and we are going to be there the night of our screening, which is on June 7th.